Hi, welcome to Bookies. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles. I'm going to be pretty negative about this particular novel. And because of that, I feel like I want to give you something fun and entertaining to think about as we get started. So pick a number between 1 and 10. Multiply that number by 9. Add the digits of that number together. So if you chose, for example, 5, multiplied it by 9, you come to 45. You would add 4 plus 5 equals 9. Now subtract 5 from that number. Match that number with the corresponding letter in the alphabet. So if you had B, that would be 2, C would be 3, and so on. Now think of a country that starts with that letter. Take the last letter from that country's name and think of an animal. Now take that animal, take the last letter from that animal's name and think of a fruit. And if you're thinking of a kangaroo eating an orange in Denmark, like and subscribe. So let's get started. Like I said, I'm going to be pretty negative about this particular novel. Here we go. So the novel had a cover, a front cover. It had a back cover. And it had a bunch of pages in between with some words on it that I find it almost impossible that anybody would care about. Published in 1949, some would argue that this novel represents the Beat generation of the 1950s. So what? I'm not one of those that thinks a novel's good just because it's representative of an era. So really, I think we need to judge this novel on its own merits rather than its representational ability. This novel was set in 1945 in North Africa. Port Moresby and his wife Kit are wealthy Americans, and they've been internationally traveling for years. They're joined in Algeria by a friend by the name of George Tunner, also an American. To boil the novel down to its nuts and bolts without giving away the plot, we have a married man embarking upon a doomed affair in a desert landscape. That's kind of it. This uncompromising pessimism of Bowles, in which quote unquote civilized people lose their minds in the North African landscape and submit to sexual slavery. It's rather tedious. You might think to yourself at first, well, okay, that might be an interesting concept for a novel, but it's poorly executed, and I'll explain why. Bowles's main character, Port, is a character's only virtue is to confront and accept his own suffering and death, stripped of any transcendental meaning whatsoever. There's no spiritual meaning in it. Put another way, Port cares about nothing, and even if it did, it wouldn't matter to him anyway. So while Bowles does an admirable job of setting the novel's mood, it's very languid, and he does an excellent job of describing the African landscape. I can really feel like I'm put in North Africa by reading this novel. I can feel that kind of depressing vibe due to the way that it's written. It's just hard to invest in a novel whose main characters really disabuse themselves of any meaning whatsoever and plunge themselves headlong into the void. And I take no issue with Bowles' writing style. In many ways, his terse, unsentimental prose lays bare a parched emotional landscape. I'll illustrate by this quote. He opened his eyes, shut his eyes, saw only the thin sky stretched across to protect him. Slowly the split would occur, the sky draw back, and he would see what he never had doubted lay behind advance upon him with the speed of a million winds. Reach out, pierce the fine fabric of the sheltering sky, take repose. It's all well and good. I think that's pretty good writing. However, this novel was really difficult to warm up to. I find it impossible to enjoy this whole existential vibe where nothing matters. If nothing matters to all the characters in the novel, what's the value in the story itself? Port is an anti-hero who's insensitive, manipulative, cruel, unrelentingly self-obsessed and totally directionless. And his wife, Kit, shares most of those characteristics, except you could add in anxious and fearful. And with regard to Kit, I find it hard to get invested in a character who seems to be rather indifferent about the fact that she's sexually assaulted in the novel. And add into it kind of this Stockholm syndrome vibe where she seems to attach to her abuser. It's very hard to get behind. To a certain extent, Bull seems to want to draft a female character that he just wants to unrelentingly punish. So, how do you care about characters who don't care about anything? Port's point of view and his take on the world is best expressed by these quotes. The soul is the weariest part of the body. 1 year is like another year. Eventually, everything would happen. Okay. The difference between something and nothing is nothing. It takes energy to invest life with meaning, and at present, this energy was lacking. Well, I will find that the energy I invested in trying to find meaning behind this novel, where the characters have no meaning, was lacking. I'll conclude with some thoughts about judging a novel based on contemporary morals. You generally want to try to avoid doing that. So, for example, we wouldn't judge Huckleberry Finn simply because some of the characters in that novel are expressing pro-slavery points of view. It's better to judge a novel on its artistic merit. However, this is a book review where I'm trying to engage with you and let you know kind of some of the themes in the novel so you can decide whether you want to read it. So Bowles does express some stereotypes about Arabs. He kind of presents them as cruel and stupid and sexually predatory. And you could also take Bowles to task for his portrayal of women who are solely defined by their sexuality and their relationship to a man. However, I don't necessarily think that I'm judging the novel based on the use of these kinds of outdated stereotypes, because I don't think those stereotypes were necessarily acceptable in 1949 when the novel was published. But more to the point, I don't think the use of either of those stereotypes really advances the story. They're just kind of in there. And I think, at least with regard to the stereotypes in women, and my own research on Bowles and his private life, it really seems to be indicative of how he felt about women. I'll conclude by stating that reading The Sheltering Sky was somewhat of an ordeal. I felt trapped in kind of an existentialist fever dream where nothing matters and nothing ever could. To that end, I'm going to give this novel 2.75 stars out of 5. The stark, beautiful prose just wasn't enough for me to recommend this novel to you. So, spend your time reading a better novel. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. I would really love it if every novel I read I could recommend to you, but I do review every novel I read going forward. And so I want to give you an honest take on a novel because I want you to decide whether you want to spend your time with it or not. To that end, enjoy your day and God bless.